You're tuning in to the Black Hollywood Live Network, featuring news, interviews, and commentary on all things Black Hollywood. Hollywood redefined. From Los Angeles, California, streaming live thanks to Akamai Technologies. This is Black Hollywood Live. Justice is served. Featuring the week's roundup and commentary on legal news. Black Hollywood Live. Hollywood redefined.
You're listening to Black Hollywood Live.
And now, the host for Black Hollywood Live, Justice is Served.
Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Justice is Served here on Black Hollywood Live. We are so happy to have you join us in our discussion of this week's legal news that we think you should know about. We're here to provide you our thoughts, analysis, opinions, and insights. I am joined today by a fabulous panel of co-hosts, starting here with BJ Abron, who is a new member of the California Bar. Congratulations again, BJ.
Yes, thank you.
He comes to us all the way from Compton. Straight out of Compton, straight out of law school, straight into your ears with his very passionate views. Thank you so much for being here, BJ. We are also honored to have Shannon Myrick's here. She is a UCLA law student in her second year. She went to undergrad at Berkeley and then took a little detour from her education to spend some time at the White House, where she was an intern and also worked there in management administration. Dang it, I thought I was going to let that one roll off my
Close
tongue.
enough.
Sorry about that, but doing some pretty cool stuff there. Then she decided to come back to school. She's at UCLA and is going to go into entertainment law. Is that what I heard is the goal?
So far, we'll see.
All
See
right.
how that pans out.
Okay, and last but not least, of course, we have Shaka Smith. Thank you so much, Shaka, for being here. He was Miami-born, Princeton educated for undergrad, then went to law school at DC, and then moved to LA to pursue acting and fitness modeling. Offers a really interesting perspective. And I am your host, Chelsea Galicia, born and raised right here in LA, been practicing workers' comp law for, 7 years now. Way too long. Alrighty, shall we begin?
Yes.
All right, so we have, I can't remember, the weeks are running together. It was maybe 2 weeks ago, the Laquan McDonald case, right? Mm-hmm. So that was a Chicago shooting where it took a year for the video to be released. About 8 days apart from that shooting was another shooting in Chicago, this of Ronald Johnsons by a Chicago police officer, and this also took a year for the video to come out because the same objections to releasing this video were made in the Laquan McDonald case, and when the judge in the Laquan McDonald case said, no, the video's got to come out, Rahm Emanuel, the mayor of Chicago, didn't want to fight this one anymore, so this video came out now, and we are about to show you. This one is less graphic than the Laquan McDonald because you can't see as well and you don't actually see it. So it's still a real life shooting. So if that is bothersome to you, you may want to look away for a few seconds. But this isn't something brutal or graphic. But you are going to see exactly what happened as the police officer who shot Ronald Johnsons rolled up to the scene. The call to police was shots fired. And so that does. We're gonna hold off on the video for just a second, but you know the biggest news that came out of this release was the decision not to pursue any charges against the officer, which is a stark contrast to the Laquan McDonald case, where they charged Officer Van Dyke with first-degree murder, and we talked about the significance of that. Here, no charges. And do we have the video now?
Yes.
All right, let's roll that. So there is no audio on it. So what is claimed here is that the Ronald Johnsons was running away into a park, allegedly holding a gun.
Right.
And so this officer showed up on the scene and was, I believe, less than 5 seconds of when he rolled up, which, you know, kind of reminds me of Tamir Rice, where the officer rolled up on the what was he, 12-year-old kid
Right.
who was holding a gun and just got out of the car and shot him 2 seconds later. So this is a little bit reminiscent of that. Also, this guy is said to have had a real gun on him, with him at the time that he was shot. And is that a good enough reason to distinguish this case from the Laquan McDonald case and not have any charges against this officer? What do you think, BJ?
On its face, I would say, of course it is. It's a huge difference. Well, again, Laquan McDonald was reported to have had a knife on him as well, so he did have a weapon. But here, having a gun is obviously different than having a knife. Now, whether that's a true statement or not is another story.
Right.
Because we've only heard one half of this, especially now since these charges are not being brought forward. We will only have heard one half. Now,
And I think that's the big issue. Because when I first read the story, I said, oh, he had a gun, and he was driving in the back of a car where one of a friend who was a witness said that he'd reportedly heard a gunfire and had assumed it belonged to him. And then, of course, the police came back and said that they found a gun by him when they had shot him initially, and then the officer took the gun and put it in his waistband.
That part is a little bit weird to me. If
Yeah.
you're shot, do you have the strength to keep hold of an object like
yes.
a gun?
Just to be clear, a number of times people are shot. They don't even, you may not even know it, just because it's adrenaline that's going on and it keeps you from actually
But
feeling
he
the
went
bullet.
down.
And-
In this instance, he went down. Now, I believe the report said that he had the gun in his hand.
Yeah.
And they took the gun out of his hand. Now, one of the things that I noticed is that prior, the initial report stated that he turned and faced the police with the gun.
That's what some witnesses tried to claim. But
And
then after they saw the video,
there was no turn. So we had one instance where what the police claimed was no longer what was true, but then other officers corroborated that version of events and said, oh, he thought he was about to turn. or
Right, it
he-
was possible.
he was about to turn.
yeah, it
There's
smells
also
funny to me.
There's also the issue of the scuffle. Apparently, when Ronald Johnson was running, he had encountered an officer and they scuffled, and he managed to push the officer down and then continue to run. So did he do that with one gun in his hand?
And then
Well,
the
I mean,
driver,
I think that's something that we should look into.
I think you'd have to question, because this officer came on the scene and you could see him get out of the vehicle within about 5 seconds, maybe 2 seconds, he started opening fire. So, and this is seeing an assailant running from a scene.
And he was the only one, right? That started shooting.
Yeah. So the question is, I think the point that you're bringing up is, how on earth was he in a scuffle with a gun in his hand with an officer? Why didn't they fire on him at that point?
and again, the driver that had previously said that he had heard a shot from
The backseat
from
of-
the backseat of the
yeah.
car that probably belonged to him, recanted that statement and said he figured the guy was dead. He didn't want to get in trouble. You know,
He didn't want a gun pinned
pinned
on him.
So why
This is
not
very
go-
bizarre.
And so that's enough to me to say, let the jury be a finder of fact here.
Yeah. So the
Completely
FBI
agree.
has not gotten involved in this one, whereas they did get involved with the Laquan McDonald. The only thing that they did, I understand, is they helped make the video clear. Which, can we just talk about the quality or lack thereof of
Yeah.
that video for a
Yeah.
second?
Of
Why
all
in
these videos.
2015 does it look like it could have been 1987?
Yeah,
Right.
of all these
Right.
videos, I don't think we would be having these discussions if we were looking at iPhone quality, you know,
How
clear.
is that? I mean,
Yeah.
listen, if you need any help, we got a lot of amazing geniuses around here. There are more cameras, high quality cameras that can see every last blemish on me,
Right.
but we cannot see
With
in
audio. With
right,
audio.
in 2015 whether a man who was running away had a gun in his
Yeah.
hand.
Well, grainy
I mean,
videos.
the reality is that the police department didn't want these video cameras to be there in the first place.
Yeah.
Now, there hasn't been any mandates as to what quality the videos has to be, and so this it clearly show. Okay, well, we'll put the videos on. We'll
Yeah.
throw you a nice little low quality video.
Exactly.
I mean,
and,
I
we'll
would
just
be
go
happy
by
if they
from
had
there.
like iPhone 5 quality camera on there, right?
Yeah. The quality of these videos are like horrendous.
Yeah, it's almost embarrassing.
Absolutely.
So
And then there's no sound.
Yeah.
It's another issue. Like I feel like we just need legitimate cameras. We need legitimate cameras that can pick up
Standardized
sound.
across all departments.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
all right, so it looks like we seem to be in agreement that something is amiss here, that there should be either further investigation, if not charges. So what charges do you think, if any, should have been brought here?
Well, I mean, looking at the Laquan McDonald charge, you can charge with first-degree murder based upon that. Now here, obviously, the facts will come out during trial, and that's what we're not going to see now. And so when we're talking about the defense attorney, he was adamant that that weapon was planted on his body and that he never had that weapon. Again, you heard the recanting statement by one of the witnesses who was in the car saying that he only made those statements because it was advantageous for him at that time. And yeah, the police, I believe they made another statement saying that, well, they had him under oath. Well, he made that statement under oath, I believe, as well. Am I correct?
Yeah, and I think that at the very least, manslaughter charges are appropriate here.
And charges aren't convictions. Charges allow the jury to be a finder of fact and to continue to pursue the investigation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do you think that the fact that just a week or two ago they charged another officer with first-degree murder had any bearing on the way they decided to not prosecute in this case? Like, they don't want to, Chicago doesn't want to seem like a city that's just against its own police and charging left and right. Do you think that they have any relationship to each other? I mean, it's hard not to draw comparisons because they're very similar. They occur days apart, and yet we're seeing such a different outcome. You know, is the fact that there was a gun involved enough to make this sort of, I don't know, understandable or just dismissible?
Well, I think it's business as usual. I think we got a couple weeks ago a video that was so, you know, it was hard to dispute. But if there's any level of dispute, it looks like they're going to always side with the cops.
In the last video, the Laquan McDonald video, you actually saw Laquan McDonald in the video getting shot.
And he was so far away. And there was it didn't feel like a very heat of the moment type of shooting.
Here you see the guy run, and he's like runs off camera, so you don't even see the moment of impact, and perhaps it's less emotional to the viewer who sees this video, and so you're like, well, I don't know. I'm trying to understand why the difference. I know that the gun changes things a lot, especially the call goes out as shots fired. So an officer rolling up to the scene assumes reasonably that shots have already been fired. The weird thing is that you roll up to the scene where many cops are already there and they're not shooting. Why do you start shooting?
Right.
So something definitely not cool here. I also, you know, we talked about this earlier when I was reading about Ronald Johnson's history with law enforcement before, and I saw that there was one, like a domestic violence, threatening to shoot his girlfriend. And for me, I'm like, well, yeah, I wouldn't be out there protesting this guy. And BJ's like, well, that's exactly what they want you to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, because you got to understand how the propaganda works and how the media is a very big component of avocation or making sure that our general population simmers down when it's time to simmer down. And so what they do is they bring up these things that are completely irrelevant in the eye of what took place, because the officer didn't have time to pull up his Rolodex and figure out the history of this guy. Yeah. He had no idea what was going on, so it had no influence on him choosing to shoot or not. Yeah. It's completely irrelevant, and it's just slander at this point to even bring up this stuff. It doesn't need to be stated.
Yeah, I would say the prosecutor, you know, they determine charges based on likelihood of conviction, and not necessarily based on whether or not the person should be charged. You know, so. In that sense, maybe the prosecutor determined something that history or other things may have been.
All of that's not coming into evidence.
It shouldn't be. But you know, the prosecutor, I think, takes a global look at the case. I'm not saying they were right to do it. I think he should be charged. But I see where they might be coming from if that's the argument they're making here. But at the end of the day, I think they really stuck a little too closely to the police department and their version of events, and the jury should have gotten the opportunity to be the finder of fact on this one.
Well, I think we're all agreed. Nobody here objects. No. All right, we are in agreement. Okay, so moving on to the city of New York. We're going to, a different page about police officers. Here we're going to talk about somebody who I'm going to call a hero. And this is Officer Craig Matthews, who is a 17-year veteran of the NYPD, and he filed a lawsuit because he thought that the quota practice, which has been illegal all along, led to unjustified stops, arrests, and summonses, and created bad relationships between the police department and the community. And he tried to complain about this, and then he was disciplined. Then his lawsuit was dropped. And then, thank goodness, an appeals court picked it back up, and he ultimately ended up winning $280,000. I don't believe that all 280 goes to him. I think it's 125,000 in damages that goes to him, and then 30,000 in lost overtime wages, and then the city has to pay his legal fees of $130,000. So, am I right to call this guy a hero?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what he's doing is setting a stage for something that should have been done a long time ago, because we have a culture in the police department of individuals who have a strong brotherhood and who really affirmatively believe in keeping up or protecting themselves by any means. If that means planting weapons, if that means falsifying statements to the media or in their investigatory reports, they'll do that. And so what you see here is, and this is just my personal opinion, of course we want to prosecute these police officers. Of course we want to see legislation change. But what you see here is very pivotal, and it's way more important than I think people realize. It's because you're changing the culture of the police department to actually work for the people. And so what I say by that is meaning that when something takes place in the police department or at a crime scene, they're not going to just back each other up, because now they're incentivized to actually protect themselves, because somebody else might come out and say and blow the whistle and understand that they'll be protected if they do blow that whistle. So I think this is very big.
Also, in breaking the code of silence, he not only faced, social repercussions and
Right.
that, his police officers felt like he was a narc, but he was also detained against his will and hospitalized. They
Right.
basically tried to make this man look crazy.
And to let you know just the kind of wrongdoing that's going on in these departments, that they're actually kind of crucifying their own. So then when you see these cases that we have Laquan McDonald, and all of a sudden things start to fit just their version of events, you start to wonder, is there more going on?
Right.
So this all began back in 2008 because Matthew says he and other officers in his precinct, this is in the Bronx, were pitted against each other to see who can make the most stops, arrests, stop and frisk, and this gave rise to this stop and frisk regime, or it wasn't. That's not what gave rise to it. The broken windows policy is what gave rise to it. But then this is how they started recording or measuring how well they were doing. Do quotas of any kind have a role here? I mean, should there be some way that we're measuring police productivity and efficiency?
I think you certainly need the numbers at the end to see what the police are doing, how many felonious assaults, just their actual metrics. But I don't think you need to have a quota in any respect. I think police should know that they have the right to determine the situation, dangerous or not, and to be able to make their judgment calls without having the specter of, I need to make this many arrests, I need to find this level of assault, or whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony. I think
you're not
that leads
helping
to
the community if you're just looking for, the only thing you're looking for is people who are doing something even slightly wrong or look slightly suspicious, so that you can stop. The only part about this settlement,
I mean, I would add, it's one thing to notice someone that is just acting out of the norm. Now, when you start typecasting people and you start stereotyping and you start picking out people that have there's no indicators of any wrongdoing taking place, now you have a waste of the city's money and the taxpayers' money at that time, because you're just simply, in fact, obviously it's discrimination at this point, but it's not conducive to good policing.
And I think the worst is maybe you do find a criminal who's committing a misdemeanor, but you don't have enough felonies that week, so you need to try to find a reason to pin a felony on this guy, and now all of a sudden any rehabilitative efforts that might have helped him from the misdemeanor are taken away. He's going to be in jail longer, loss of job, loss of life, wages, all these different things.
Not to mention it incentivizes wrongdoing on the behalf, and I'm not even just talking about targeting these people in a stop and frisk or a Terry stop. What I'm talking about is planting evidence and creating circumstances that will allow you to meet those numbers.
Yeah.
so the only part of this settlement that was somewhat a bummer to me was the fact that the city did not acknowledge any wrongdoing in settling this case. I think who came up with this quota system? Should they be penalized, punished? I mean, if they're still on the force.
Should be fired.
I don't know if it goes far enough. I mean, this vindicates the officer, who I am again going to call a hero, because he is, and also because I think it's important that people know that even though we cover a lot of cases of police brutality, police killing, what appear to be innocent people on this show, that I at least have a lot of respect for good police officers, and I appreciate them. And when I see stories like this, especially, I mean, I cannot imagine the position that this guy was in. Does he keep his job, his reputation, not make any waves, or does he stand up for what's not just legally correct, but morally correct, what's best for the community at large, for the country at large? I mean, I think he took a ginormous risk, and he should be rewarded heavily.
Yeah, the likelihood of success was low. So, yeah, this was a huge risk on his part.
I mean, now the city has to pay out this money, and when we say the city, it's really just
Us.
taxpayers. And they don't admit wrongdoing, but do you think it changes anything within the department?
Not at all. I think at this point, all that's going to happen is the department is going to become more sophisticated with this quota system. Maybe it's not a quota system now. Maybe it's, hey, we just want to recognize Jim because he had 10 felonies this week. You know, it could be something like that. It could be sort of a volunteer, just like maybe just a reward system. So instead of redlining people who don't make the quota that week and shaming them like we're in third grade, instead they're going to just reward people who have a massive amount of arrests and who supposedly have more productivity than
the
others.
officers are going to get promoted?
Yeah, well,
There's a potential for that, but I think overall they're just going to become smarter about how to, you know, keep this sort of policing system, and maybe even retaliate, you know, more severely against officers who speak out. I mean, to have someone hospitalized, to give them punitive assignments, to deny them overtime, which is also an employment law violation, is pretty egregious. And I think that they'd go even further at this point.
yeah, my hope is that my hope is one officer would make a different decision. My hope is one officer would make a different decision based on this, but given what this guy went through to get there, it's still a lot. So,
that's the reality.
Yeah.
That's the reality,
So-
and I completely agree. I just think that, like I said, I mean, obviously it's still a groundbreaking circumstance,
Yeah.
and I think that, I mean, I'm in line with all of you guys. I think that it will change for him. You'll still see some type of incentivization for arrest, but I think that we definitely should stand up as a country. And this guy, his picture, you're talking about putting pictures over billboards of people making ignorant statements. This guy's picture needs to be across the nation, and we need to honor this guy for what he did.
As a hero, and celebrate him. I mean, we have to go looking for these stories.
And that's when things will change, is when we start to do that kind of work. So the media in general starts to do that kind of work.
So everybody praise Officer Matthews. All right. Now, Shaka, turning it over to you.
It is our time. Football season marches on, and while your season-long fantasy team might be going nowhere fast, every week is a new shot for glory at DraftKings.com. DraftKings is the destination for one-week fantasy football, where you can relive the fantasy draft and play for huge prizes each and every week. Challenge your friends in a custom league, or join an existing one to play for your share of the $1 billion in prizes up for grabs this year. This isn't fantasy as usual, this is DraftKings. Welcome to the big time. Hurry to DraftKings.com now. Use promo code BLACK and play for free with your first deposit in Sunday's $1 million fantasy football contest. First place takes home $100,000 and a lifetime of bragging rights. Enter BLACK for free entry now, only at DraftKings.com. That's DraftKings.com.
Yay, football. All right. Okay, now to Yale we go. This is a follow-up to like a Halloween story that was part of this sort of onslaught of college protests about racist practices at colleges that either were not addressed or not sufficiently heard when students had complaints. And one of these came from Yale, where the Intercultural Committee sent out a memo to students asking them to be conscientious about their choice in costumes, trying to dissuade them from wearing costumes that were culturally insensitive, that could be offensive. So that went out just as a suggestion, something to think about. Didn't have any rules that it tried to cite, didn't try to say if you don't follow along, you're going to be punished in any way. It was just I think something that a cultural committee like this should have to do. I mean, if they didn't do it, it would almost be like, well,
this is why they exist, right? To create cultural awareness and, foster mutual understanding across different cultures.
Well, one teacher, a professor at Yale, did not agree with that, and she thought she sent out an email to students disagreeing with the recommendation by the Intercultural Association. She says, is there no room anymore for a child or young person to be a little bit obnoxious? Do we even have to try to be obnoxious? A little bit inappropriate or provocative or, yes, offensive, she wrote. American universities were once a safe space not only for maturation but also for a certain regressive or even transgressive experience. Increasingly, it seems, they have become places of censure and prohibition. So this started an uproar, and she decided she didn't want to teach anymore. She's resigning. That she, I keep saying, is Erica Christakis. She taught courses on child development and psychology. And frankly, if somebody who's teaching child development and psychology is encouraging us to be more transgressive and less mature, less conscientious, less thoughtful, less sensitive, I don't really know if she needs to be teaching at any place, especially Yale.
Yeah, I thought her comments were more appropriate for like an 8 or 9-year-old child, not adults who are legally adults at a top university that are supposed to be conscientious of, cultural surroundings. And I saw where she was coming from an academic setting. If we're in the classroom, feel free to say what you want so that we can create a discourse. But these kids live on campus. It's their safe space. It's their home. And so creating a divisive home, I think, would be the last thing anyone on that campus would want to do.
I think overall it's important that she understand that the Intercultural Committee was not, requiring that students not wear Native American headgear. I think they were attempting to foster an understanding of culture in the hopes that people would decide not to do it. But also, if they did decide to do that, they have to understand that there are repercussions because other people have First Amendment rights as well. It can also be inappropriate and regressive towards you as well. And I think that's something she misunderstood.
Which is funny. The reason she cited that she's no longer teaching is because, I forgot to take down the quote, but essentially it was because she felt that the environment of Yale was no longer conducive to civil discourse. Is that something?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what you said. And we're not talking.
Isn't
We're talking about Halloween and people partying and feeling safe at home. We're not talking about
costumes.
Yeah, this wasn't a seminar or a lecture or a precept. This was like them living and enjoying their living space.
And this initially began because there were African American girls who were trying to go to a party on campus or at a fraternity house that is affiliated and associated with the campus, therefore subject to its policies, and they refused to let them in because they were black girls. So that's certainly not a civil climate. And the African American students' responses and intercultural committees also partnering with those students respond is because there is no civil climate already on their campus.
But so she reacted to this memo that went out, and then a lot of people reacted to her.
Right.
But as far as I saw, there was no violence, there was no rioting. There was these students did not go off the deep end. They just passionately disagreed with her. Is that not what civil discourse is?
Yeah.
So she's leaving because she, to me,
Couldn't handle it.
didn't like the response that she got, not because the environment was not conducive to anybody saying what they wanted to say.
And curiously, Yale said you can come back anytime, but a lot of times when you're asked to leave, you're asked to leave voluntarily with a sort of a good look for both the university and for her. So at the very least, I think she's out of a situation where she's impacting these young kids.
Yeah, I don't think that First Amendment free speech has to clash against being sensitive and being conscientious. I don't think people that come up with these silly costumes are doing it to make a statement, like I'm dressing like a Native American because I'm making some kind of statement. They're just being thoughtless. And all that this memo was is asking them to be a little more thoughtful.
And I think we've all had friends that have probably regretted doing something of that nature. And
Once
had
it
they
was
seen an
pointed
email,
out.
had they seen an email, they would have thought twice about doing that.
I think this is silly. So sorry, but good riddance to you, and I hope you find a more I don't know. All right, so this week, gosh, last week at around about this time, there was breaking news about a shooting in San Bernardino, and we heard about it just minutes before we went live, and there was not enough information out there for us to bring to be really of any service, just that we knew that there were shooting. We had no idea who was involved, how many people were involved, and now we've learned that 14 people were killed at a holiday party, and that the shooters were a husband and wife team, an American citizen for the husband, although he's Pakistani born, and his wife was also Pakistani born, raised in Saudi Arabia, and had come here recently on a fiancé visa. So this couple had like a 6-month-old baby, and apparently had become radicalized. Her social media page indicated that she had pledged allegiance, I guess, to ISIS, and the husband's father said that his son supported ISIS. And so now we had 14 people that were killed at the husband's company's holiday party. The husband was a health inspector for San Bernardino. So not only 14 people killed, but 20 others shot. I mean, horrible, terrible, frightening, senseless, and all the attention now is on the fact that these were Muslims, the two shooters, and Donald Trump took it upon himself to issue a statement. So not something that he said at any live event, not answering any questions. He just issued this statement that we should ban all Muslims. Done. And most people, well, can I say most people? I'm going to say many people are upset about this. They see this as un-American,
Right.
not just Democrats, but also Republicans. Right. But apparently there's a lot of people that believe him or believe in what he's saying because he's still coming out ahead in the Republican polls. And it leads us to think, well, could this really happen?
I mean, Donald Trump, the statement is ridiculous, first of all. And obviously, being on the show for as long as we have been, you guys know my sentiments, and it won't be hard to figure out that I am not a proponent. In fact, that I don't like Donald Trump. In fact, I think Donald Trump is no more than a Ku Klux Klan in a suit, to be honest with you. And so as far as I'm concerned, but let me just say, the one thing I do like about Donald Trump is that he doesn't hide his views and ideologies like many others in power do. Because you see, these other people hide their ideologies in legislation. Mm-hmm. They hide it in policy. Mm-hmm. They hide it in their corporations and their, in
so
their
true.
Functional
that.
businesses or entities. And so that's one thing I do like about it. We can see him coming from a mile away and not elect him. What's crazy is that I think that you were kind of getting at that point is that so many people still follow him and still agree with his sentiments and ideologies. And so my thing, honestly, from my perspective, I almost, his statements are such that I don't even want to, speak with people or talk to people, associate with people who would still vote for this kind of man. I think he's a mockery to what this country is supposed to stand for.
And yet, in American history, we have incidents where we have excluded, banned groups of people. We've done this with the Chinese Exclusion Act, and we've also done this with the Japanese internment. So let's do a little refresher for people who don't recall or even know about this. Shaka, do you want to start us off in the China Exclusion Act?
Well, we had the Chinese Exclusion Act, which excluded the Chinese workers from coming in that we'd actually recruited.
This was from the time when we were building the railroad.
Yeah. And so we'd actually recruited them, and then we decided to exclude them. And then we went further, obviously, with the Japanese and putting them in internment camps. And as far as I know, while the Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed by Congress, I don't know if we ever found this to be illegal.
It went to the Supreme Court because a Chinese man who had been in the United States working for 12 years had gone back to China to visit his family, tried to get back in, and he wasn't allowed in. And he took it all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said no, that Congress has plenary power to legislate, and that was that.
Yeah, so we eventually
repealed it. Such was the same with Korematsu.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court decided that Japanese internment camps are okay in the interest of national security. Sounds familiar?
Yeah.
Sounds a little bit like post 9/11.
Right.
So this is still very present and possible today.
And so legally, from a legal standpoint, what he's suggesting is absolutely legally plausible. And so I think
Although in the
yeah.
these two circumstances, we talked about countries,
Exactly.
Chinese
Big difference.
and Japanese. Now we're talking about Muslims who make up, I understand, 25% of the world's population,
Going for it.
and they don't come from a single country.
Right.
But we've just spent the last 10, 12 years talking about this war on terror that is a nebulous war. So,
But see, that's where we have a problem in this country. Because what does the war on terror mean? In this country, in this country, it actually means the war on Islam. That's what it's become. That's what it's come to mean, actually, and it should mean that. And that's happened from 9/11 through that's the power of the media that we talked about.
and I think it's become that to a certain degree because there has been no one country you can quantify it down to. And so we can talk about Pakistan and Afghanistan and these pockets of resistance that are against American interests, but because there has been no one country you can say we are fighting you, we've had this nebulous war.
Well, this didn't come out of left field. There were a lot of people, including Bernie Sanders, I guess you can tell who I hope becomes the next president, who were saying if we go into Iraq and invade, that it will destabilize all of the Middle East.
Yeah.
So we knew that this was going to have a big effect on not just one country, but on many. And we had been in the Middle East for a long time. We had supplied guns, weapons to many of these groups, rebel groups, and then some
including
of these...
ISIS and Al Qaeda.
But I think the question is, are we going towards the harm as best we can? And I can see why they would say, well, it's Muslim extremists that are causing this harm. So if we ban all Muslims, that gets rid of the extremists.
Okay, great.
I
Except
think
we still have
we're
Dylan Roof
knee-jerking.
and James Holmes, who were homegrown, white, different kind of terrorists,
Right.
who I am
And to
equally
ban all
just as afraid
Muslims
of.
is definitely just knee-jerking here.
It is.
We're responding to San Bernardino that happened last Wednesday. Let's face it, this couple immigrated here. So we think the best way to avoid all terrorism is not let any more Muslim immigrants into
Well,
this
I'm
country.
gonna-
Except
The problem with that is that the majority of the terrorists in the United States are homegrown. We're also very unique in that not even the European powers, Britain and France, have as many homegrown terrorists as we have. And that's really interesting that ISIS has been able to radicalize people over social media.
Right.
So
That's right.
closing our borders and just pointing towards our borders and taking a massive religious group of over 1 billion people and denying them entry into the country because of 4% of that population is extremist.
let's
This
be a
is
little-
not responsible.
Well, to be devil's advocate, when Trump came out with this statement, he cited this report that said 25% of Muslim Americans are fine with the violence of extremists against Americans. That they are content with that violence, and that's what he cited. I can't talk to the specifics of the statistics and whether or not they're accurate.
So if there was
or
a
not,
way that we
but-
could round them up, fine. But we can't do that, and it's even un-American to do that because a belief in something
Yeah.
you can't prosecute somebody for.
I would say content doesn't even rise to the level of belief.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
being like, I don't want to bother with this and put your blinders on is not necessarily.
I know.
You are on the level of an extremist.
BJ's chomping at the bit.
I just think that when we're talking about these types of incidents and we're talking about terrorism in America, and that's why I completely agree with you that the vast majority of these individuals are homegrown. But let's go a little bit further with that, because the reality is the vast majority of the terrorists that takes place on this land are not just homegrown; they're conducted by white American men. And so if we want to start throwing shade, or I shouldn't even throw shade, if we want to actually keep people out of this country, well, we need to look a little bit closer at who's actually conducting the vast majority of these terrorist
We have
attacks.
a lot of racial hate crime. We have, we had the abortion.
But I
Right.
think,
There's a different kind of homegrown extremists.
I just think that
that we should look at.
with those issues, immigration wouldn't necessarily solve that. Like closing the borders don't solve those issues. Other things solve those issues, and I think they're separate issues that we have to look at and address
Well,
aggressively.
how does immigration solve an issue of a homegrown terrorist I'll just say who is a Muslim?
Well, this guy went over. So, because remember, Donald Trump has also said he wants even Muslim Americans, if they're abroad currently when he puts in the ban, that they will not be allowed back for whatever period of time it is for us to then determine what's the best way to go about letting people back in. So,
And that's absurd. I'm Muslim, and I'll tell you
yeah.
this. I a high offense to that statement, because you're telling me now, and I've lived here, I was born here. My ancestry actually dates back way before any type of European conquest to this land.
Yeah.
So to tell me that when I leave this land simply because I'm Muslim is preposterous. It's crazy, because we need to really take a second and think about who are the true foreigners in this land when we start to talk about these immigration laws and stuff.
I agree, but I just don't know if that goes necessarily to the harm that he is trying to prevent and that most of America is sort of fearful of. And so when I play devil's advocate, I want to look at what's driving this, because he's got a large amount of
What's
support.
driving
So
it is fear, and he's really great at tapping into the fear. And we all have fear, but that is the name of this game
It
of
is.
life,
It is.
to not give into the fear, to overcome it, to look at the reality, to address problems in an intelligent way. If we all just ran around, he is being called a demagogue. He is a god of fear, if he had to be called a leader of something. He is the leader of the fearful. And sure, we are all saddened and angry and afraid to be shot up at a movie theater or a holiday party, but we can't give in to fear to begin to treat other people badly. It's not American.
Also, his policy on banning Muslims is basically just touting a false sense of safety. So let's say we got rid of every single Muslim and we denied anyone who went on holiday re-entry into the country. Everyone's going to say, "Whew, I'm safe now. I can go to an abortion clinic and get birth control now.
I can go
to my Christian church and have service and praise and worship, and that should be perfectly fine."
But
it's important that the public understands that this is not the greatest threat. The numbers, the math, it does not add up.
I will say this, I do not agree with Donald Trump's ban on all Muslims, but do I think we probably do need to look at a stronger look at our immigration policy? If there are loopholes that are too loose, are there better ways to scrutinize a fiancé waiver to come in? I think we do need to look at our immigration policies, and that gets us there to look at it. I think it's great, but I do not agree with the ban on all Muslims.
Yeah.
But I do see where he's coming from and why it's a talking point.
But see, the concern, as she just stated, the concern is completely displaced. I see what you're saying about, hey, well, maybe we should look at this. Yeah. But the numbers, like she just stated, the numbers don't show you that that's what we should actually be focusing on.
Right.
But they do show you that's a problem that we can look at through our immigration policy.
Well, I can tell you there's a million problems we could look at.
We can look at the
talk
banning
about
assault
which ones
rifles.
we should focus on first.
Well, yeah, but I think they're all game, and I think you have to look at everything. I think during the presidential
But see, I
election, you
think
have
that's
to
the
bring
problem.
everything.
Is that's what I hear from. This is not a political show, but here I go. That we hear a lot from the Republicans. Well, we got to look at this. We got to look at the mentally ill. We got to look at the. Let's stop. Let's actually look, and then let's do something. But that's the thing. Is let's take the time to look at this and consider that.
And I think I did hear that they did tighten up some of the waivers or immigration waivers right after that shooting.
Yeah,
so.
and President Obama said on Sunday he wants to take gun rights away from people who are on no-fly lists, and hopefully things that are simple enough for us to agree on.
Well, if you look at the criteria on how you can get on a no-fly list, it's very low. It's so
I know
low.
we've had
Anybody can
government
be placed
officials
on a
mistakenly
It could
placed
be
on
from
no-fly
mouthing
list.
off to the gate
It's
agent.
ridiculous.
You can get on a no-fly list.
It's
Well,
ridiculous.
that's interesting. All right, so obviously this lends
Be
itself
kind
to.
to gate agents.
All right, that's good. Okay, so we have to move on to somebody that maybe you are familiar with. I personally am not familiar with his body of work, but we are going to talk about porn star James Deen. That is not his real name, but he apparently, from what I understand, is a pretty well-known performer. Is that what they're called? He's been at this game for 10 years or so, and there have been a slew of women, I think about 9 women, who have come forward to say that he sexually assaulted them. It's a little reminiscent of Bill Cosby, where I don't know if he's called the golden boy of porn, but he's, I guess, well known, received. I have to be very careful with my
There's a
words here.
large female following.
Yeah. Okay. So somebody with a lot of female respect.
He was called a feminist. He was considered a feminist among.
Well, although he
true.
said I'm not a feminist and I make
Yeah.
rape jokes, and that doesn't mean I'm a rapist. But so he, was well respected, and then now these women are coming forward. Nobody has actually gone to the police. Filed, or there's no charges been filed, and the reason they give, obviously, is very interesting. that nobody takes them seriously anyway, and law enforcement even thinks, well, if you put yourself in the position to be a porn star, you sort of are asking for it. But so 9 women have come forward to say that they forced them to do things that they didn't want to do. Why should we care?
Well, I think this is a very big women's rights issue. I think that today that women are still feeling they cannot report sexual assault is an issue. And whether you're a porn star or not a porn star, because you still have women on college campuses wondering, did I wear something too provocative? I can't go to the police. And so I think this is actually sheds a light on a bigger issue about women's rights and the fact that we do need to protect everyone, males, females, victims.
There's also the issue of these male celebrities who are at the top of their field, and this is why he's being compared to Bill Cosby, who almost seem to sometimes have the persona that they are untouchable. And sometimes that can actually give rise to this sort of activity, and knowing that, hey, I'm James Deen at the top of the porn industry. If I rape this wannabe porn star, who will say anything?
Yeah. And she's got to work with me in the future if she wants to continue to rise in her own career.
Or if she wants to work in the industry at all in the future, she has to keep her mouth shut.
And because she was his actual, it was reported that she was his ex-girlfriend. Yeah. Well, one of the people, I think.
Several of them, right?
And so that also brings back that same conversation that I'm sure we've all heard of or talked about in law school as to whether a man can rape his girlfriend, right? Yes. And that brings back that in. And of course, I think we always say yes.
Just in case you didn't know.
Of course, right? And so, but I think that that's on the table as well, is that question, because I think this is a complicated circumstance simply because of, and from what I've read, I don't watch Takeover, just put that on the record. But from what I actually read, I didn't know about him until this. But from what I read, like, he engages in violent forms of sexual intercourse. Am I correct? Yeah. And so when you have sexual intercourse with that type of a person, or you're in a relationship with that kind of a person, it becomes convoluted. And I think you stated early, Shaka, that there's a what do they call a safe word? Yeah. And that he violated her safe word. She gave the safe word. Yeah. But I think even with the safe word, just because of these types of sexual activities that are going on, it really complicates the circumstance. And I hate to see it because, like you say, should we care? I mean, we're talking about rape here. Yeah. Of course we should care.
Yeah. It should be cut and dry. It just isn't. It's unfortunate. It's
it would be great if these women were able to come forward and successfully bring charges or lawsuits, because then, college women would be like, well, if the porn stars can be vindicated, then I can too.
Yeah, right.
All right, that will have to be the end of our show. Thank you so much, BJ, Shannon, and Shaka, for joining me. If you'd like to leave comments, please do, or you can tweet me at Chelsea Galicia or BJ.
Just BJ Abron.
Shannon Myricks.
At Shaka Strong.
And join us again next week for another episode of Justice is Served. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
From producers Maria Menounos, Dario Kristen, Tiana Hobson, Kevin Undergaro, and the entire BHL crew, we would like to thank you for supporting Black Hollywood Live, the first online broadcast network dedicated to African American entertainment. For questions and comments, contact us at info@blackhollywoodlive.com. Like us on Facebook, tweet us or Instagram us at BHL Online. And I'm your BHL announcer, Scipio. Instagram me at Planet Scipio. Thank you for tuning in.
Hollywood Redefined.
The views expressed here are those of the host only and do not necessarily reflect the views of BHL or its owners or principals.